gentlemen, I wish to thank our guest speakers profoundly for gracing the occasion with their esteemed presence. They have certainly enlightened us on the dynamics of Indian extremism and its implications for its own people, the region, and beyond. I would now request Air Commodore retired Khalid Iqbal to please present a summary of the plenary session. Sir, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Plenary session was indeed a marathon session of the conference. Its theme was extremism in India, faces and dimensions. We started from the historic investigation into the phenomena of Hindutva. So the findings were that from historic perspective, that in about year 1820 or so, the Britishers tried to consolidate whatever the caste Hindus were available in an organized entity, and they were formally called Hindus, and then they started working towards their national reassertion. And in around 1925 is the time when once the concept of Hindu Rashtra or Hindu nationalism was given, and the basis were on the it was on by birth, a person who is born to the Hindu parents or in an area or geographical location would be called a Hindu, and that is how they started reasserting formally, although they have been reasserting politically in the times of Mughals and earlier also, but this is in the contemporary area in the context of the British colonization period and then on. And then once we talk about this phenomena, we see that its underwriting reasons are academic. Probably the concept of nation state and democracy, very modern concept and sacrosanct in nature, that everybody tends to believe that these are the supreme concepts, have their low side also, and that is probably one of the reason and side effect that these kind of phenomena are surfacing not only in India but in other countries of the world. For example, nation state is defined as a group of people in a defined territory living under an authority, political authority. So once the inclination, ideological inclination of the people is disregarded as far as the concept of nation state is concerned, whereas practically it continues to exist. If there are people of four or five religion in a country, and the nation state is formed, and we considered it as a nation state, but they may continue to behave like that for centuries, but at times whatever the fault lines, ethno-sectarian fault lines are there amongst those people, they tend to resurface whenever the overall political authority either goes weak or becomes erratic or becomes party to one of the ethno-sectarian groups within that nation state. So the trouble starts there. Secondly, democracy also. The people who have different orientations, they may continue to behave like a nation for a certain period of time, but then it may turn into a tyranny of a majoritarian rule at a point in time, and because of the fault line again surfacing, because the dominant group wants to ignore the minority groups and they want to dominate in a way that they do not give even playing field to the minorities in various social societal activities as well as economics as well as political rights. So these all things degenerate, and this is how we try to have a phenomena of extremism, and the extremism that is now evident in India is because of the religion, because the Hindu people are in majority in one man, one vote system. It is the Hindu vote which is going to ultimately matter. So that is what everybody is trying to do, is trying to appease the majority community within India to have the political power. Then we also talked about the politicization of religion in these countries and religionization of the politics also in India. But at the same time, in the broader context, we also concluded that this is not the thing happening in India only. There is a wave within Europe, in America. So it has got to do something more with that. And ultimately, we also discovered that they are all interlinked. Hindutva has a strong network in Europe and America, from where they influence the policy level echelons to take decisions which are favorable to India whenever it comes to Pakistan, or in case of Pakistan, China, or other where they have a commonality of interest with the Americans and the Europeans. With this, then we continue to say what direction Hindutva is likely to take. Will it subside? Is it going to rise? So the finding was that for some time to come, it is not going to subside. It is going to have an uptick trajectory, and it's something which is dangerous not only for the regional countries because they pose a potent threat to the regional countries wherever they want to. It is also something like it poses danger to India for an implosion from within, because more the minorities become disgruntled, they might start looking for a separate entity or asking for a greater autonomy from within India. Therefore, it's not very good thing to have a Hindutva rise of Hindutva and a sustained rise of Hindutva in India, because it will weaken the state from within, not in the immediate future, but in the medium to long-term time frame. It is going to have adverse impact on India. Similarly, the way it had 1940s and 1930s, when Muslims felt that they have no future while living with India in one man, one vote domain, where they had the adverse ratio of 1:3 or 1:4 with the Hindus, and they asked for a separate country. The other minorities may also ask for separate pockets, either of separate countries or autonomous regions within that. And we see that ultimately this Hindutva or religious extremism in India is ending up into political marginalization of minorities, because they are not getting their true representation in their parliaments or the provincial or their state assemblies. And we have only 22 members of parliament, which is the lowest ever number. Muslims have become members of parliament, and while if you go by the percentage 14.5, it translates into much more seats. Recent election in UP were cited as an example in which BJP did not find even a single Muslim candidate suitable to even fielded, what to talk of winning. So this kind of attitude is creating kind of alienation between Muslims and other minorities vis-a-vis the Hindu majorities, and this is going to continue because of the reason that Hindu majority majoritarian point of view and the talk of having dominant Hindu religion in India is selling well amongst the masses for the time being, and even those voices which are liberal voices about 10 or 15 years back are also embracing the same point of view to get more votes, as the Hindu vote is going to determine who is going to rule India. As far as other minorities are concerned, they do matter once there is a coalition and weak governments, but if there is a predominant alignment of a particular political party with the majority community or majority religion, then they don't have to bother that much for the minorities. So this is how the Hindutva is coming. Now there are certain points where we say that how it is taking. There are three major problems were brought out by the chair of the session in his concluding remarks. One was the strategic direction of India. That is, it is a threat to not only to Pakistan, but not to region, but also with Hindutva going beyond certain red lines. It could very well be a global threat. And Pakistan's choice was recommended by him that Pakistan should do it via soft power, build knowledge base about India. He deplored that in Pakistan there is not even a single university or a think tank which is specifically looking at the Indian thought process and the way India is doing their thinking and the think tank process and the policy level thing. And he emphasized that we should have an institution which should be India specific and which should be taking a focused look at the way Indians think and the way Indians are likely or poised to behave in short to long-term time scales. Rise of India is not indigenous in his point of view, in Dr. Riffle's point of view. He said rise of India is not an indigenous phenomenon, it's over-projected, plus it is being powered and pushed externally. And why it is being pushed? Because at global and regional level, those countries which are trying to over-project India, their interests coincide with the interest of India, and the major interest out of these is contain China policy. So India fits in there. So to keep, and India is very kind of a hard bargainer. So India has its own framework, communicated to those people, if you want me to do this, I will do this. I'm not sure whether even after achieving all the objectives India will do it or ditch Americans at the end. But so far these interests are coinciding. Therefore the weaknesses of India, which will otherwise be very glaring in terms of human rights violation and the treatment towards the minorities, especially Christians, Dalits, Muslims, is being overlooked and oversighted by the Americans. Then then the phenomenon of politicization of religion and religionization of politics also came into discussion, and again it merges with the weakness of the state structure or the conceptual level of state and democracy. These were some of the discussions which went through during the preliminary session, and set the motion and had provided a primer kind of an input. Knowledge infusion was there with regard to the genesis of Hindutva, its operational methodology, and the consequences and future trajectories. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to take this opportunity to request Dr. Junaid to say his concluding remarks for breakout session 1, Rising Hindutva, Responses from Within.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We had, considering it was after lunch, we had a very lively session indeed. I believe both Mr. Iftikhar Gilani and Murtaza Shibli added a lot to today's conference in the first plenary session also, and subsequently in the second session. Basically what I am taking home from what Mr. Gilani said was that actually whatever is happening within India, at the very fact that right from the beginning India had been establishing commissions, and he did mention a couple of them, but he had also had direct exposure to the last one, which is the Sachar Commission report, in which all the recommendations that were given out of 76, 74 were just rejected right away, and they went ahead to create a ministry for minorities as well. And then he also narrated the incident with the newly appointed secretary, who clearly didn't know what to do, and in fact didn't want to do anything also. So all what he did was he got a lot of money to start propagating as to what great things Indian government was doing for the minorities. In fact, it was such a beautiful move. It antagonized the majority. That how come our money is being used for minorities? On one hand, you did nothing for the minorities, and on the other hand, you succeeded in antagonizing the Hindu majority. So consequently, it is quite clear that whatever happens in terms of extremism in India, it is backed today by the Indian government as a policy tool. It is like the American policy tool of creating trouble in the Middle East. It's a part of their psyche, it's a part of their long-term plan. And the kind of role they have had in Afghanistan and so on and so forth, it is a similar kind of Indian government approach to promoting extremism. I had then added that I have also seen all the laws that have been enacted by their parliament to protect their law enforcement agencies. And there are something like 21 different laws. And I've gone through those 21 laws. They actually provide an ironclad support to the law enforcement agencies. Not only then a question was asked about Indian courts. The Indian courts also follow what the rest of India does, and it gives no relief. Mr. Iftikhar Gilani had also then narrated as to what had happened to him, and the amount of years that he had to spend in jail, and as to what the courts could have actually gone ahead and hanged. He also gave some other examples. So all elements of all the three pillars of the Indian state, the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, all three are doing their best to create and promote this extremism. Mr. Murtaza Shibli also added another dimension to this, that today there is hardly any voice left in India even the communists that used to be talking against many of the policies of the union government are completely now changed, and they have started supporting the union government and the Hindutva policies and programs that are being manifested and implemented all over India. And he also very correctly said, when the question was asked about Arundhati Roy, that people like her, and of course there's also Barkat Dutt, that what these people are nakar khane mein tuti, ki kya gunj aur ki kya awaaz. So basically there is little positivity that you could see from both sides. Gilani साहब ने जिस तरह से उसको बहुत अच्छी तरह समराइज किया, that was great. He presented the 4-point agenda of BJP, which I think we in Pakistan need to understand. Creation of the Ram Mandir, and also along with that is the removal of other Muslim symbols from India. Then not only that, but the other 4 points. I'm sorry, how could I forget? The repeal of the Article 70 of 370. Sorry, Article 370 of the Indian Constitution, relating to a separate status for in the Indian occupied Kashmir, so that question, and making it as an integral part like any other state, taking away that special position of Kashmir, stop the cow slaughter in India, and introduction of uniform civil code, where whatever Muslim identity in terms of the Muslim personal law, etc. was concerned, would also be taken care of. If you begin to look at the implications of all of this, it tells you as to what route India is going to be taking. Murtaza Shibli Sahab also said something which stuck in my mind, that what will Pakistan do if there is a genocide of Muslims carried out in India, and there is an influx of Muslims that come across our line of control? I think that has become even more difficult. I'm sure all of us have seen the border wall which has been created by India, and how difficult it would be to penetrate that. But anyhow, I believe that would be a possibility, and it may also happen. And Pakistan needs to be cognizant of this. We need to come out of this syndrome of being hegemonically controlled by America and American policies, and come out and to be able to face these truly in terms of eye to eye and understanding. I have to come back to one very important thing, and I would like to congratulate Khalid, my friend, for really having done a brilliant job of doing. I think, as I said in my opening remarks also, this is the first seminar that I know out of my 64 years of life, 50 years, I have never seen anything like this in Pakistan. And I am very happy that you have done this, and I think it should snowball into other institutions in the country taking up this situation and taking up this cause, and a proper center is created to study what India is doing, what is it likely to do, and what will be our responses to that. मुझे आखिर में एक बात कहने में कोई हरज नहीं होता कि जब हम सब मिल के सोवियत यूनियन को तोड़ सकते हैं ना, तो इंडिया क्या समझता है? तो with these words I would like to stop. Thank you. तोड़ा है ना सर?
Thank you very much, sir. May I now request Syed Muhammad Ali Saab to please summarize his breakout session.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Khalid Rahman Saab, for the opportunity to participate in a very enlightening and illuminating day in the galaxy of some of the finest minds and practitioners and very experienced people who bring with them a lot of wisdom and experience, and offering me an opportunity to learn and benefit from all of your knowledge. The session, despite being organized after lunch, did not, I think, bore anyone, and it was quite intense as well as vibrant. The panel, let me just, for the benefit of those who did not participate in that particular breakout session, had some of the finest minds Pakistan has to offer, and also from our friend China. Ambassador Basit, Chinese scholar Ye Hailin, former Foreign Secretary Ambassador Salman Bashir, Professor Dr. Rifat Hussain, and chair was Dr. Waqar Masood Khan. I think most of these names do not need any introduction. And the topic was Rising Hindutva, Responses from the World Community. So what we attempted to do in around 2.5 hours of intense discussion is to understand, unlike what happened in the other session, is to look at the external behavior of India at regional and global level. So I think the internal dynamics have been aptly and comprehensively explained by the earlier two rapporteurs, but I think in case of our session, both the discourse and the advice was somewhat more sober and thought-provoking, if I may use those words. At the global level, I think it would not be inappropriate to say that the discourse essentially reflected a disdain and indifference of the international community, but growing instability and concern at the regional level. But in terms of the implication of the Indian international behavior in political, economic, and strategic dimensions, I think it will be appropriate to say that in the political dimension, it is exuding increasing ambition and confidence. In economic dimension, it is growing and also engaging at a wider and more deeper level with the economic powerhouses of the world. And at the strategic level, it is forging close strategic alliance with the existing superpower US in order to coerce, isolate Pakistan in particular and most smaller neighbors in general. So that is the overarching behavior which I could infer from the very intense and candid discussion. But more specifically, the speakers offered very candid and thought-provoking assessment and policy prescription. We started off by a very interesting and thought-provoking remarks by Ye Hailin, who somewhat shocked us by telling the Pakistani friends that China looks at Pakistan not in geopolitical terms but geoeconomic terms. And if China were to see India as a growing threat, that would lead to greater military commitment towards India, which is not in geoeconomic interest of Beijing. So that was, I think, a very thought-provoking remark by Mr. Ye Hailin, and he also warned that China looks at India as a geoeconomic opportunity, and the geostrategic significance of Pakistan should not neglect that in terms of its long-term policy formulation. And he warned that too much Chinese pressure on India will also push New Delhi further towards US, which is neither in Chinese nor in Pakistani interest. The next speaker was former Foreign Secretary Salman Bashir, who also offered a very deep and profound assessment of what's going on in not just this region but also the world at large. And if I can use just one sentence to explain, to encapsulate what he said with a lot of relevant examples, is that the world is changing in all its forms and manifestations. And what the Pakistani nation and its leadership and also its youth must do is first to fathom and understand the gravity, the intensity, the diversity and nature of this change in order to formulate and articulate an appropriate policy towards both changing region and the world. He identified technology, demography, generational shift, and changing worldview as some of the drivers which are shaping this rapid and intense transformation of world politics. This was also followed by a very profound remark that this is leading to growing anarchy in international politics and reduced role of government in governance, which is being joined by new emerging actors at multiple levels in various societies. And all societies and states need to address this growing challenge appropriately in order to preserve both their peace and prosperity. He also warned that we should not lose hope by the rise of India, because unlike India, China has a very deep historic civilizational edifice on which its policy behavior, both internal and external, is rooted. And that cannot be, and India and China cannot be compared because, by any figment of imagination or yardstick, because India in comparison is still looking to shape an identity which explains and justifies its international behavior. That was followed by Dr. Rifat, and he also agreed with what Ambassador Bashir mentioned, and he said in this growing anarchy in international politics, he raised the important question that do people really matter? I mean, how relevant are these changes and transformation to the common people? And to prove his point, he gave the example of the 80,000 people which we have sacrificed in the war on terror in the last 18 years, and so many Kashmiri lives which Kashmiris have lost in Kashmir in their struggle. But do these lives matter for the world politics? If not, then what should be done about it? That's very important. So the moral and ethical stance on Kashmir needs a fresh review, and our indifference and non-attention of Kashmir issue is not an adequate and appropriate policy. He particularly highlighted a 2015 report titled Structure of Violence in India, which highlights its contradictions. However, he disagreed with the Chinese friend and said that geopolitical interests are more important, and particularly for Pakistan, geoeconomic ties with India would not be a wise step because the Indian hawks are adamant to isolate Pakistan, so we should not help them in this agenda. This was followed by a very candid and somewhat bold presentation by Ambassador Basit, who said that Hindutva is a worrying reality, but a recent phenomena, and essentially a very smart strategy of India, which is internally aimed at creating hope and fear against Muslims and people of other identities. So it has blended successfully with the corporate Indian interests, and then he identified the major industrial giants of India that they wear this identity on their sleeve, and this does not lead to disinterest in investing in India. So that is something that we need to look at. And Hindutva is not getting as much attention abroad as it should and it must. So it also offers an opportunity and perhaps a challenge for Pakistan, which I think this seminar is perhaps a timely but a small step in that direction, that the international community needs to be apprised of the gravity and the significance of this Hindutva. He disagreed with Ambassador Bashir on the point that Hindutva is a recent phenomena. It is a political strategy by the Hindu elite in order to carve an identity which is politically, strategically and economically utilitarian. So essentially what he was saying is that by providing it a basis based on history and reflections of people like Chanakya and Kautilya would actually help justify this political strategy and provided the philosophical basis which it actually lacks. So that is a very interesting argument, and I think requires deep thought, that it is not something deep, profound, historic, civilizational, but something which is recent. And I think here his line of argument was similar to what Ambassador Zamir Akram was saying in the earlier session as well, that the credit for introducing religion into politics goes to Indian National Congress, not Muslim League. So that is something we must not lose sight of. But he advised that in order to deal with aggressive, ambitious, well-armed and wealthy India, Pakistan must not lose hope, but it should exercise strategic patience. It should conduct itself with dignity and self-confidence and not follow a policy of appeasement, and engage whenever there is an opportunity based on mutual respect and mutual interest, and not compromise on any of our core interests. So, sir, these were the thoughts based on the session where I was honored to be a part of, and they were concluded by one of the leading economists who also has an interest in Hindutva, Dr. Waqar, who said that in order to deal with India, and the parting, as a parting note, I think that is something perhaps really profound and worth reflecting. Looking at external powers is a habit Pakistan must recover from. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I would also like to take this opportunity to request Director General IPS to present the memento to Syed Muhammad Ali, sir. Okay, sir. Please deliver your vote of thanks.
Something?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim.
Sir की speech है उसके बाद.
अच्छा.
This was a long day, but Alhamdulillah we are concluding it. I recall my friend Murtaza Shibli said twice in his presentation. In fact, he complained about the consistency of inconsistencies in Pakistan. Consistency of inconsistencies in Pakistan.
Pakistan is consistently inconsistent.
While making this observation, I think he was referring to the opportunities that Pakistan has continuously been missing vis-a-vis the situation emerging within and around it because of these inconsistencies. And I'm sorry to share that this last session of our seminar today is yet another casualty of these inconsistencies, as we have been deprived of our guest of honor for this concluding session because of an emergency party meeting which Mr. Mushahid Hussain is just attending at the moment. Nevertheless, I am glad that we are successfully concluding our seminar, where we had more than 20 presentations and speeches, dilating upon a number of important themes, including the concept and genesis of Hindutva, its economic and political dimensions, responses to it from within, as well as from the world community. We have just heard three summaries by our very eminent moderators of the three sessions, and therefore I am not going to repeat those points at this concluding stage, what has already been said. I would, however, take this opportunity to emphasize 3 points. The feedback that I gathered during the intervals, and of course from the stage as well as from the floor, was that the deliberations have certainly enriched the learning of the participants. While this is encouraging for IPS and its team, it reflects an important reality. Knowing that whatever has been discussed here was just a tip of the iceberg, it shows how deficient we are in our knowledge and understanding of an aspiring global player who happens to be our next door neighbor and with whom we have so many issues to tackle with. Dr. Rifat Hussain rightly described it as knowledge deficiency that needs our urgent attention. So along with budget deficit, this is an area we really need to focus on. Next, the seminar has emphasized that while the situation is getting worse, the internal political factors in India as well as global political dynamics are currently favoring the extremism phenomena. It would therefore seem to continue for a while with no immediate redressal. This brings me to the third point, and that is that though it's a long journey, the sticking to the status quo is not an answer. All stakeholders will have to be proactive. Among the stakeholders internally, the biggest challenge, I believe, is for those justice upholding elements in India, and especially for those who profess secularism in the country. There exist elements in the intellectuals and academics, legal community, media, and civil society circles, which are active for the purpose despite enduring tough administrative measures from the government. Their existence and activities certainly provide some hope, though until now these have not been effective enough to stop the ongoing discrimination. Nevertheless, this will be essential for their own survival as well, that they try to make their struggle more effective. A persisting challenge is for Indian minorities and their leadership. Whether they will remain to be insignificant and ineffective despite being millions in number, or they will take lead and set their house in order. notwithstanding their lack of representation in political and administrative avenues, they need to devise an innovative and comprehensive socio-academic strategy with which they could empower themselves to play more efficient and productive roles in the society. Networking within, and we have been told that a kind of divide and rule strategy is being pursued. Mr. Murtaza Shibli rightly pointed out that Muslims and Dalits are being divided, and Dalits are being fed to fight against Muslims through different ways. So networking within various oppressed groups and the saner elements in the majority Hindu population is important to strengthen their struggle. In the international arena, it's a challenge for the fair intellectuals, and I'm afraid there are not many. Human rights organizations and the global media, that they not only unearth this situation and expose the excesses being done to the minorities in India, but also be able to put enough pressure on international and regional organizations and various countries to be ready to play a role through their policies to improve the situation. There have been voices occasionally in Human Rights Council and other forums against the human rights violations in India. The need is to make these voices even stronger. Ladies and gentlemen, understanding and creating awareness were the objectives we had before us while organizing this seminar. Yet, this was the first major seminar that IPS has organized on this subject. It is certainly not the last. We would be continuing our efforts in the interest of promoting harmony among the human beings all over the world. And to quote Senator Raja Zafrullah Saab, in the morning session he said, "No political, social, or economic agenda should justify discrimination and extremism. And while there are differences in cultures and practices across every country, there are varying religions and skin tones in those societies. Yet, what the modern democracies need to display is the art of carrying all these segments of society under one umbrella of justice." So I think we have a long agenda before us. We are all stakeholders. In this globalized world, in this shrinking world, we cannot remain isolated, looking at things happening and remain silent. So we have to be proactive, and I think with this seminar we have made a beginning, and inshallah we shall be continuing it. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gave us this opportunity to organize. I thank IPS team for taking a lot of pain in organizing this whole event, and my particular thanks to all the speakers who have given very good presentations. In fact, we would like to document all these presentations and speeches, and I'm sure you will be cooperating with us by revising if you feel, or by elaborating further your speeches. And I also thank to the panel of moderators who is sitting here. In fact, it is very difficult to organize a session with such a large agenda and having so many good speakers and participants. But they have not only done that, but have presented very good summaries, I should say, because without spending 2.5 hours in one session, you could have the idea that what happened there through these very beautiful summaries. So with this, I announce conclusion of this seminar, and hope and look forward to see you again. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank all of our speakers, especially Ambassador Jalil Abbas Jilani, Ambassador Salman Bashir, Ambassador Zamir Akram, Air Commodore retired Khalid Iqbal, Syed Muhammad Ali, Dr. Junaid Ahmad, Murtaza Shibli, Iftikhar Gilani, Ye Hailin, and others. Thank you very much for coming here. Thank you very much, IPS team, for being with us, being together, and putting up a great effort to organize this seminar. Thank you very much. And all the guests who came here to make this event a successful event, thank you very much.